Mark, we're moving in a new strategic direction. Your role has been made redundant. Those were the words, cold, clean, and delivered with the rehearsed sincerity of a man who had practiced them in front of a mirror. The man speaking was Bradley Thorne. He was 35 years old, with a Wharton MBA, a $7,000 Brioni suit, and the predatory calm of a shark that had just smelled blood. My blood. My name is Mark Reynolds. I'm 51 years old. For 23 of those years, I was the senior most broker and the rainmaker at Vance & Associates, an insurance agency I had helped build from a two-room office into a regional powerhouse. The book of business under my personal management was valued at $78.4 million in annual premiums. I didn't just manage it. I had built it. One client, one handshake, one late-night phone call at a time. And now my role was redundant. If you enjoy stories about quiet competence, dismantling loud arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You're going to want to see how this plays out, because what Bradley Thorne didn't know was going to cost him everything. The meeting was in the main conference room, the one with the 20-foot mahogany table that the founder, Arthur Vance, had commissioned back in 1998. I knew the table well. I had helped Arthur pick out the wood. Now, it felt like my own coffin. Bradley sat at the head, flanked by two humorless analysts from Apex Capital, the private equity firm that had acquired the agency 6 months ago, following the death of Arthur's widow. Bradley slid a ridiculously thick folder across the table. It was bound in a glossy blue cover with the Apex Capital logo. This is your severance package, Mark. It's quite generous, I think you'll find. Standard non-compete, non-solicitation. We're giving you 6 months' salary. 6 months' salary. My base was $250,000 a year. The commissions on my book of business were nearly 3 times that. What he was offering was a pittance, an insult wrapped in corporate procedure. He was buying my life's work for the price of a mid-range BMW. The market is changing, he continued, steepling his perfectly manicured fingers. We need to be more agile, more data-driven. We're integrating our client portfolios into a new CRM platform to optimize renewal capture and leverage synergies across the firm. Optimization, renewal capture, synergies. He was using a language I didn't speak, a dialect of business school buzzwords designed to obscure a simple, brutal truth. He was firing me to steal my clients. He believed the relationships I had spent over 2 decades building were just assets, line items on a spreadsheet that could be integrated and leveraged by a new, cheaper account manager. He thought the clients belonged to Vance & Associates. He was wrong. Bradley Thorne, with his expensive education and his confident smile, had made one critical, catastrophic mistake. He'd signed the acquisition papers for $16.8 million. But he had never bothered to read my client files. I joined Vance & Associates in the fall of 1999. I was 28, hungry, and had just left a soul-crushing job at a massive national insurance carrier. Arthur Vance was 65 then, a gentleman of the old school who believed a man's word was his bond, and a handshake was a contract. The agency was just him, a secretary named Carol, and a book of business worth maybe $2 million. He gave me a desk, a phone, and a simple instruction. Go find people who need help and help them. The money will follow. And so I did. I worked. I put 80,000 miles on my 1995 Ford Taurus in the first 2 years alone, driving all over the state to meet with small business owners, construction magnates, and freight company operators. I didn't just sell them policies. I learned their businesses. I walked their factory floors. I knew the names of their children and the dates of their wedding anniversaries. When a hailstorm ripped the roof off a client's warehouse at 2 a.m., they didn't call an 800 number. They called my cell phone, and I was there an hour later with a thermos of coffee and the claim adjuster's direct line. My life was a series of sacrifices laid at the altar of that company. I missed my son's third-grade play because I was in a deposition for a client's liability claim. I celebrated my 15th wedding anniversary with my wife, Sarah, over a lukewarm dinner at a hotel restaurant in a town I can't even remember, because a trucking client's rig had jackknifed on the interstate, and I had to manage the scene. The agency grew on the back of that work. By 2005, we had 10 brokers. By 2012, we were the largest independent agency in the state, and my book of business was the foundation of it all. $78 million. It wasn't just a number. It was 340 relationships built on absolute, unconditional trust. Bradley Thorne and Apex Capital arrived in February 2022. Arthur had passed away years earlier, and his widow, Eleanor, had finally decided to sell. Bradley held a town hall in our main office. He stood at a podium, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation filled with charts and corporate jargon. He talked about unlocking value and implementing a new paradigm of client engagement. He looked out at a room of seasoned brokers, men and women who had spent their careers building this place. And he spoke to us like we were dusty relics in a museum he had just purchased. He saw our experience not as an asset, but as a liability, an expense to be optimized. He immediately started making changes. He implemented a new phone system that routed all calls through a central receptionist who didn't know any of the clients. He demanded we all start using a new, clunky CRM software that was designed for selling widgets, not for managing complex, multi-million-dollar commercial insurance portfolios. He replaced the good office coffee with a cheap, bitter sludge from a vending machine. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one a signal that the culture Arthur Vance had built was being systematically dismantled. But the real weapon, the one that would ultimately save me, had been forged years earlier in the crucible of a crisis. The breaking point came in February 2008. The financial world was melting down. AIG was on the verge of collapse. Clients were terrified. Their trust in large financial institutions was evaporating overnight. Arthur, then semi-retired, but still the agency's conscience, called me into his office. It was a dark, wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. He was 74, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He poured 2 glasses of Macallan 18. "Mark," he said, his voice a low rumble. "These people out there, the ones running these big banks and insurance companies, they've forgotten the first rule. They think they're in the money business. We're not. We're in the trust business. Money is just how we keep score." He slid a standard client service agreement across his mahogany desk. "Look at this. It says they are a client of Vance and Associates." That's a legal fiction. Frank Gallo with his construction empire isn't a client of the firm. He's a client of Mark Reynolds. Maria Flores and her logistics company? She doesn't trust a letterhead. She trusts you. He picked up a pen. "We need to make that explicit. Protects the client, protects the relationship, protects you." He pointed to a blank space under Section 4, Client Services. He wrote a new subsection heading with a steady hand. 4C, Designated Agent and Personal Service Guarantee. "From now on," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "with every high-value client, new or existing, you add this clause. Get them to sign an addendum. It will state in plain English that you, Mark Reynolds, are their exclusive designated agent. It will state that the services provided are personal to you, and it will state that should you ever cease to be employed by this agency for any reason, the client has the unilateral right to transfer their entire portfolio to any new agency where you are affiliated, with no penalty or delay." He took a sip of scotch. "One day, I'll be gone. Some slick-haired kid with a fancy degree might be sitting in this chair, and he'll see your clients as nothing but a column of renewal commissions he's entitled to. This clause is your shield. It makes the relationship the asset, not the policy number." For the next 14 years, I did exactly that. Every major client agreement contained Section 4C. Over time, 340 of them. It was my standard operating procedure. It was the bedrock of my promise to them. You're not with a company, you're with me. I never thought I would actually need to use it. It was a contingency, a failsafe born from an old man's wisdom. Now, sitting across from Bradley Thorne, that failsafe was the only thing I had. My house, my son's college tuition, the retirement Sarah and I had planned. For it was all tied to the work represented by that $78 million book. Losing it wasn't just a professional setback. It was a threat to my entire life. I looked at Bradley. He was smiling that empty, confident smile. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. We'll have your effects couriered to you tomorrow. Your network access has already been revoked. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. A dead calm settled over me. I simply stood up, pushed the severance folder back across the table toward him, and said, "No, thank you, Bradley. I don't think I'll be needing that." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He was expecting a fight, a plea, an angry outburst. He wasn't prepared for quiet refusal. I walked out of the conference room, the two security guards falling in step behind me like pallbearers at a funeral. My funeral. Or so he thought. I didn't go straight home. I drove to a small, unassuming office building a few miles away. 2 weeks prior, as soon as I realized what Apex was planning, I had leased a small, 2-room suite. I'd already filed the paperwork for Reynolds Risk Management, LLC. I had ordered business cards. I had set up a phone line and internet service. I had consulted with my attorney, a sharp woman named Jessica Finch, who specialized in contract law. When I walked in, Jessica was already there, a stack of folders on the folding table we were using as a desk. "How did it go?" she asked. "Exactly as we planned," I said. My first night of unemployment was spent not in panic, but in methodical preparation. Sarah made coffee while I sat at our dining room table. I opened my personal fireproof safe and removed the binders. In them were hard copies of every single client agreement containing Section 4C. I had spent the last 2 decades being meticulous. Now, that meticulousness was my ammunition. I built a spreadsheet: client name, company, policy types, annual premium, renewal date, personal contact information. The next morning, Bradley Thorne made his second critical error. At 9:15 a.m., a mass email went out to all 340 of my clients. I know because 10 of them forwarded it to my personal email address within minutes. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, written by Bradley himself. It announced my sudden but well-deserved retirement and thanked me for my years of service. It then cheerfully introduced their newly assigned client transition specialist, who would be reaching out shortly to ensure a seamless continuation of our valued partnership. He had lied to my clients. He had called me obsolete, then told them I had retired. It was a foolish, arrogant move. He assumed the clients were passive. He assumed they would simply accept the change. He didn't understand that the valued partnership wasn't with Vance and Associates. It was with me. The chaos began almost immediately. My phone, my personal cell, started vibrating. It didn't stop for 3 days. The first call was from Frank Gallo, a tough-as-nails construction magnate who was my oldest and largest client. His company paid over $1.2 million in annual premiums for everything from general liability to kidnap and ransom coverage for his executives overseas. "Mark, what is this nonsense about you retiring?" he boomed into the phone. "You're younger than I am. I just got an email from some kid named Chad. Says he's my new guy. He asked me for my policy number. You believe that? 21 years I've been with you, and this punk asks me for my policy number." I calmly explained the situation. I didn't badmouth Bradley or the firm. I simply stated the facts. The agency had been sold. The new ownership had terminated my position, and I had started my own independent agency. There was a pause on the line. Then Frank said, "Well, that's that then. Where do I sign?" You think I'm going to trust my entire business to some kid named Chad? Send me the paperwork. We're coming with you. That was the first domino. For the next 72 hours, I had the same conversation over and over again. Some clients were angry on my behalf. Some were worried. All of them were loyal. Not one of them, not a single one, said they were staying with Vance and Associates. While I was fielding calls and emailing transfer documents, the situation at my old office was deteriorating into a full-blown crisis. I heard about it from Amy, a young administrative assistant who had always been loyal to me. She called me that Friday, her voice hushed. "Mark, it's a disaster here," she whispered. "The phones won't stop ringing. All your clients are calling, and they're all furious. They keep asking to speak to you, and when the junior brokers say you're not here, they just hang up or start yelling." Bradley held a meeting this morning and told everyone to reassure the clients and aggressively pivot them to their new representatives. Nobody knows what that even means. 2 of the junior guys he assigned your accounts to are practically hiding under their desks. The tipping point came the following Monday. Just as we had predicted, a crisis hit. A tower crane belonging to Frank Gallo's company collapsed at a downtown construction site. It was a major incident. Injuries, massive property damage, and a media firestorm. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes event I had managed for him a dozen times over the years. Frank's first call, out of pure habit, was to my cell. His second was to his lawyer. His third, just to see what would happen, was to the main line at Vance and Associates. He was put on hold for 10 minutes, then transferred to Chad, the 25-year-old who was now supposedly managing a $1.2 million account. Chad, overwhelmed and out of his depth, asked Frank if he had filled out the initial incident report form on the client portal. That was it. Frank called Bradley Thorne's direct line and, as he later recounted to me with considerable relish, unleashed a torrent of abuse so loud and so profane that the people in the adjacent offices could hear every word. He informed Bradley that not only was he moving his business, but he was also going to make it his personal mission to tell every contractor, developer, and subcontractor in the city that Vance and Associates under its new management was dangerously incompetent. The emergency was created. The stage was set. Panicked, Bradley scheduled an emergency all-hands meeting for Tuesday afternoon. His goal, Amy told me, was to project calm and control, to announce a new, enhanced client service rapid response team, and to stop the bleeding. He had no idea the patient was already dead. At 2:00 p.m. on Tuesday, as Bradley stood at the front of that same mahogany conference room, trying to rally his terrified troops, a professional courier walked into the lobby of Vance and Associates. He was carrying a large, heavy cardboard box. He delivered it to the receptionist with instructions that it was for Bradley Thorne, immediate and personal. The box was brought into the meeting and placed on the table in front of him. He looked annoyed at the interruption, but his curiosity got the better of him. He opened it in front of everyone. Inside were 340 neatly organized, individually bound documents. Each one was an official, legally binding agent of record transfer request. On top of the stack was a single-page letter, printed on the letterhead of my attorney, Jessica Finch. I have a copy of that letter framed in my new office. Bradley read it aloud, his voice starting strong, then faltering, then shrinking to a choked whisper. "Dear Mr. Thorne," it began, "please be advised that pursuant to the Designated Agent and Personal Service Guarantee Clause, Section 4C, contained within their respective service agreements, the 340 clients listed herein have formally and irrevocably requested the immediate transfer of their entire insurance portfolios to their designated agent, Mr. Mark Reynolds, of Reynolds Risk Management, LLC. A murmur went through the room. The other senior brokers, the ones who had watched me get fired without saying a word, were staring at Bradley, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. They understood the terminology. They understood the cataclysm that was unfolding. Bradley's face had gone the color of ash. His hands were shaking as he continued to read. Enclosed you will find the signed and executed transfer authorization forms for each client. We expect the complete client files, including all historical data and loss runs, to be securely transferred to our offices no later than 5:00 p.m., Friday, October 28th. Any refusal to comply with these legally binding requests will be met with immediate legal action for tortious interference and breach of contract. He dropped the letter onto the table as if it were on fire. He started rifling through the folders, pulling out the transfer requests one by one. Frank Gallo, Maria, Flores, all of them, page after page of his newly acquired assets walking out the door. This is impossible, he stammered, looking around the room for support. These are corporate assets. They can't just leave. The last paragraph of the letter delivered the final, killing blow. Jessica had crafted it with the precision of a surgeon. Furthermore, please be advised that as per the terms of these agreements, all future and pending renewal commissions associated with these 340 accounts are to be directed to Reynolds Risk Management, effective immediately. An itemized invoice for commissions due on policies renewing in the next 60 days is attached for your convenience. The room was utterly silent. The $78.4 million book of business was gone. Not only that, but the very renewal revenue Bradley had counted on to justify the acquisition was now legally obligated to be paid to me. He hadn't just lost the asset. He now owed money to the man he had fired. He had walked into a trap set for him 14 years earlier by a wise old man and a broker who believed in trust. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The two analysts from Apex Capital, who had been in the meeting, quietly got up and walked out of the room. They didn't say a word. They were on their phones before they even reached the hallway. Bradley Thorne was fired by Apex Capital before the end of the week. The brilliant acquisition he had spearheaded was now a smoldering crater. The firm lost millions on the deal, and their reputation took a massive hit. Bradley was professionally ruined. The last I heard, he was working as a freelance consultant, which in our industry is a euphemism for unemployable. He was undone by the one thing he should have respected, the fine print. The enablers didn't fare much better. The senior brokers who had watched me get tossed aside were now captains on a sinking ship. The agency was a shell, its primary revenue engine gone. Within 6 months, half of them had left, struggling to rebuild their own books in a market where loyalty was suddenly a hot commodity. Several of them called me, fishing for a job. I politely told them I wasn't hiring. The first person I hired was Amy, the young admin who had kept me informed. I made her my office manager and gave her a 40% raise. She runs my back office with fierce efficiency and loyalty. My own life was transformed. Reynolds Risk Management was a success from day one. Free from corporate overhead and MBA speak, I could focus entirely on my clients. The business thrived. Within 18 months, my book of business grew to over $100 million as my clients, especially Frank Gallo, became my most vocal advocates. I work hard, but I work for myself. I set my own hours. I haven't missed one of my son's baseball games since I started my own firm. Sarah and I take real vacations now. The constant, grinding stress that had been my companion for 2 decades was gone, replaced by a quiet, profound satisfaction. I had built something. They had tried to take it, and I had protected it. I still work out of a modest office, not a gleaming corporate tower. On my wall, there isn't a diploma from a fancy business school. There's a framed photograph of me and Arthur Vance, taken 20 years ago at a company picnic. We're laughing, shaking hands. Behind my desk, I have the letter Jessica Finch wrote to Bradley Thorne, a reminder. In business school, they teach you about assets and liabilities, profits and losses. But Bradley Thorne never learned the most important lesson. He never understood that the most valuable asset in any business is trust, and betraying it is the one liability from which you can never, ever recover. Your value doesn't disappear just because an arrogant fool is incapable of seeing it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button, leave a comment letting me know what you think, and make sure you subscribe. Hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. I'll see you in the next video.